Karen Schindler with Aztec Labor to come on this call and kind of give a brief H2B overview, and then preparing for 2024 filings. So welcome, Ms. Karen. Take it away.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Hang on. I muted you and not me. Sorry.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. So first of all, how many of you guys are using the H2B program right now? Can you raise your hand? Some of you. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think you, Carrie Jane, you said about 40%-ish of your members, I think, use the program. Let me tell you a little bit about who I am and who Aztec is. So I actually started working for a landscape company right out of college. And they were doing the H2B program. I'd never heard of it. It was Hillenmeyer Landscape and Nursery in Kentucky. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's pretty large. I started working for them, and they were bringing their H2B workers at that time. I had never heard of the program, but I knew I wanted to connect foreign workers with employers. At that time, I was interested in kind of the Hispanic community in the area, and I wanted to connect them. So I started working with them, found out about the program. I was like, that's my ticket. So right after that, I started my business in 2004. So I've been doing this quite a long time. And it's so rewarding to see the employers, once they are greeted by the workers and they, finally get their workers and everybody's happy and they, they're able to count on the workforce for the season. It's just a very satisfying feeling. And I love helping workers, and I love helping the employers get the workforce that they need for the season. So that's a little bit of how I got started. In 2011, I took a hiatus and I went to work for the Department of Labor, the Office of Foreign Labor Certification in Washington, D.C. So I was there working on policy and procedures for the H2B and some of the H2A program as well. I was on the ombudsman team. So I took some time to get plugged in and network with the government side of things. And then in 2016, I went back into business for myself. I'm in California, but my family's in Kentucky. So I'm very familiar with the, Southeast. And so currently we provide services to employers all over the United States. And we're growing. So that's why I reached out. We've got several companies that we're working with in your area, and reached out to Carrie Jane to see if it might be a good opportunity to present you our services. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with, let me share my screen real quick here. So those of you that are not familiar with the program, I'm just going to kind of give an overview of the benefits and kind of how it works. So obviously the benefits are you get a workforce that you can count on. We know that it's the U.S. workforce has been diminishing in your industry for quite some time now, and in other industries, and specifically for employers that have a seasonal need for laborers. And so the program was established back in the 80s for employers that need workers on a temporary basis. If you do not need workers on a temporary basis, then you will not qualify for the program. So how do you actually qualify? You have to be able to come up with payroll records, any kind of contractual agreements showing that you may need workers year round, but there is a period of time when you need to supplement that core workforce with additional laborers. So that's very important. You will not qualify if you do not have any kind of proof to substantiate that you have a temporary need for workers. The process takes between 5 and 6 months. So if you need your workers starting in February, for example, we need to get started within the next month or so. And I'll go into that a little bit more in detail. The obligations of the program are pretty, I mean, it's pretty basic. You have to comply with the Fair Labor Standards Act. Some people ask about if you have to provide housing. So it's not like the H2A program. You do not have to provide housing for the workers. You just have to make sure that they're set up. You can secure an apartment, or if you have a house that you want to rent to them, that's totally fine. You just need to make sure that when they get dropped off at 6 a.m. in the morning, that they're not left in some alley. They've got to be able to, you can put them into a motel or something, but they can pay for their housing. And they can actually find their own housing. You just need to make sure that initially when they get here that they're set up and they've got a place to go. One of the questions is, can I choose my own workers? Yes, if there are workers that you know, or if you have workers currently that are working for you that has relatives, friends, family members that are, from Mexico or another foreign country that is on the list, you can actually bring those workers as long as they have a clean record. So the H2B program, the issue with the program is that there's a cap. There's a cap of 66,000 annually each year. That's just a drop in the bucket. It's not enough visas to go around. This was started, this cap has not been raised since the 80s when the program was initiated. So each year they divide the cap into in half, starting at the beginning of the fiscal year. So on October 1st, there are 33,000 visas available. And then on April 1st, there's an additional 33,000 visas available. So if you apply for October 1st, up until this year, you would have a good chance of, making the cap. And actually, I would say this year as well, because historically, there haven't been as many people applying for an October 1st start date that there are applying for an April 1st start date, because the majority of people in the seasonal industry need workers, during spring through fall. So if you apply for October 1st, then, you're probably going to make the cap. If you apply for April 1st, your chances of making the cap in the last couple of years has historically been about 25%. So it's not that good. What does that mean for you? Well, I will go into what C Labor, which is our big lobbyist group, is doing to secure additional visas for you guys. So what are the steps in filing? It's pretty easy for you as an employer. We do all the work for you. The very first step is to obtain a prevailing wage, which is usually pretty spot on with what employers are paying in the area. So wherever you're going to be working, there's a database that the Department of Labor uses to figure out, okay, what is the common wage for that specific position in that area. So whatever the wage has been based on a survey over the last 2 years, they will determine this is the wage that you need to pay the H2B workers and anybody in corresponding work. So any US workers are supposed to be paid at minimum that wage as well. So the National Prevailing Wage Center will issue a prevailing wage. It takes about a month to a month and a half to get the wage back. Once we get the wage back, we can submit an application to the Department of Labor. The application goes over all of the terms and conditions of the job opportunity. you also have to submit a job order at the time of submitting the application that goes to the state workforce agency. And that job order gets circulated throughout the state and any supply states. There's a couple of states that they'll send it to, that they've determined are supply states for your state, for your area. So most people do not get applicants. Some people do. It just depends. But when we submit the job order, the state workforce agency has to, if we request, they have to go through the terms and conditions of the job before they actually offer that job to somebody to apply. So you do have a lot of people that are going into the one-stops, the American Job Centers, that are looking for unemployment, or they're not really interested, or they want a job that starts now and not in 2 or 3 months. So the recruitment process is, you may get people that are interested, but if there's no real reason that you cannot hire them, you will have to hire them. And if you're requesting 10 workers and you hire a US worker, then the Department of Labor will certify you for only 9. So you have to understand that there may be people that are applying that may want the job, or they probably don't. And if you have to hire them, they may or may not show up on the day the job starts. So usually we recommend requesting a few more workers than you actually need, just in order, just to be able to cover yourselves in case you have to hire people that are not going to show up when the job starts. So again, depending on how many people you actually hire during your recruitment period, which I didn't say, but it's a 15-day window, then the Department of Labor will certify you based on how many people you were able to hire and based on the number of workers that you were requesting. Once they have certified your application, if there are visas available, your application goes to USCIS, which is US Citizenship and Immigration Services. And they basically just put their stamp of approval on it. It's about a 1 to 2 week process. They're kind of the last say. Once USCIS approves you, then your workers have to get approved. Your workers have to be screened at the US Embassy or the US Consulate in Mexico, depending on where you're bringing your workers from. They have to go through their own application process. They are thoroughly vetted. And so, I know a lot of people are, curious whether certain people that they know have potentially been in the United States, whether they'll be able to get a visa. It really depends on their record and what the systems that the Department of State uses to vet them has on them. So we recommend only bringing workers that have only been here legally or have never been here before. But it's something that if you have a question about somebody, or they may have, a history in the past, we can look into that for you. So the whole process, again, like I said, takes about 5 to 6 months. And, once the workers get here, everybody's happy and they get to work, and, you've got your season set. So going back to the cap, let's say you need your workers in February. Well, like I said, there's not going to be visas available in February, traditionally speaking. So you're going to have to rely on politics. And what happens with the omnibus spending bill is usually where additional visas are released. And that can happen anytime, throughout the end of the year. We're expecting Congress to come back shortly, and I think in the next couple weeks. And there's different moving pieces for the strategy of being able to obtain additional visas, but typically the omnibus spending bill is when the additional visas are released. Last year there were three. They actually announced early, the first time ever that they announced when they were going to be releasing the additional visas. And they announced it early in the year so that employers could plan. So last year they released visas in January. They released additional visas in April, and then again in May. So that was very helpful to plan for, and it does affect your filing strategy. And we can talk about those that are more seasoned. We can talk about that in detail later. But I just wanted to let you know, just because there's only 66,000 visas available each year, that doesn't mean that that's where it ends. There are moving pieces. There's also the Graham-Padilla bill that C Labor has been working really hard on, and they are securing, they're in the process of securing a permanent fix for the H2B program users. And I will go into that here in a second. But I just wanted to answer a couple other questions that people have. So costs. So the cost per application is about $6,910. That doesn't, we bring workers, we bring, 1 to a couple hundred workers on an application. It doesn't matter how many workers you're bringing, we're going to charge you the same amount, because it's the same amount of work essentially. Now, there's a variable cost per worker because you have to spend a certain amount. So all the transportation and the meals and any kind of expense that the worker incurs to get to the United States, the employer has to either reimburse or pay up front. And then there's a consular fee as well. So the approximate cost per worker is about $600 that we've estimated. So if let's say you need 12 workers, you're going to be investing about $14,000 in direct filing fees. Okay, so I did want to go over a little bit. Let me bring up the filing strategy for those that are a little more seasoned. So this is C Labor's kind of one pager on the Graham-Padilla bill. Now this is huge because just the other day there was a meeting on the Appropriations Committee brought up the H2B, and there were a couple members that were wanting to interject. I think one person said like a 1-year release or relief, but several members said no, hold on, we've got a better thing coming down the works in the pike, which is the pending Graham-Padilla bill. So this bill is actually it's massive. There's a lot of support. It will allow returning H2B employers who have received a labor certification in each of the last 5 years to claim the highest number of positions from any of those 5 years exempted from the cap. And this is a one-time exemption. So this is huge to people that are already using the program. It also increases the cap from 66 to 125,000. And of course, like I said, that would be the first time that the cap was increased since 1990, late 80s. And then there are some exemptions, which are the equine industry, rural seafood processors, and the mobile entertainment industry, the carnival. And then there's some other kind of restrictions on construction and meat packing, but it is definitely a huge it's a big deal for employers that are already using the program. So that is in the works for long-term fix. Now, for people that are filing for the 2024 season, what does that look like? Well, one of the things that I was just on a C call this morning, one of the things that they're thinking about including is this exemption for workers from the Northern Triangle countries. The administration has made a deal with Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to kind of stave off the migrant flow. And so they have prioritized visas to those countries. If you have workers from any of those countries, or if you're interested in workers from those countries, I would suggest making that more of your goal, because the government is more favorable to visas from those countries. And so one of the fixes, at least for the 2024 season, is to potentially make visas from the Northern Triangle country cap exempt, which would mean if you need workers from those countries, you don't have to worry about the cap, and you would be, secured those visas for the 2024 season. So that's just one kind of option that I would kind of push people for, especially if you're getting started and you're not particular with the country that you're wanting to bring your workers from. And then, like I said, we're hoping that they will release the additional 64,000 plus that they released last year, and the 3 kind of waves. So January, April, and May again, which those would be subject to returning workers that have had a visa within the last 3 years. So that's kind of my spiel. I am available for questions.
That was awesome. Thank you, Karen. That was a ton of information. And it is 12 o'clock. So I want to let you know that this is the end of our meeting. But if you have questions, if you need to go and you don't have any questions about H2B, you're free to go. I'm going to continue to have questions, and we'll be here for as long as we answer these questions, still recording, if that's okay with everyone. But for those of you that are leaving, thank you. And my first question, Karen, was how often does the prevailing wage rate change? Like, could you not get your workers because you applied because the wage rate changed? Or is it an annual thing and that it's never going to change till the next year?
So the prevailing wage, they change every July. And usually it goes up. I've seen where it does go down sometimes, depending on the area and the position. But essentially what it is, it's they're taking statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics from the Department of Labor, and they're taking the previous 2 years worth of survey results. So typically it's pretty straight on. I will say that if you're a straightforward landscaper and you're not doing anything outside of the box, the Department of Labor is usually straightforward with issuing the code for landscaping. But, if you are doing lighting, or you're doing, some other things that are not standard to what the typical landscaping and groundskeeping position is, they may issue a wage that is higher because they may see some of the duties or equipment that they're using is something that would be in a more expensive wage, and they will issue the wage that's more expensive for you to use throughout the entire period. So you have to be very careful with what you're listing as the job duties. Of course, you want to be transparent, but careful in what you're listing so that you don't get an expensive wage.
Okay, yeah, that answers that question. And so July, or right now, is the time, since you said it takes 5 to 6 months to go through this process, starting at prevailing wage every time. Do you have to start the process from that point and follow every step that you mentioned every year, even after? Okay.
Yes, every year it's the same process, because every year the Department of Labor wants to test the local workforce to make sure that there's available US workers or not to be able to certify you. So it's the same process. You have to get a prevailing wage. You have to test the local labor market every year. And the way to do that is to, submit an application and submit a job order.
Okay.
You used to have to put newspaper ads and things like that. Thankfully, they realized that was outdated.
So the last question that I had that is probably petty, but so and I think you answered this question by how risky is this process to go through it and not not be guaranteed anything. So for 2024, you're guaranteed the triangle workers, but if you don't go for that, you're not guaranteed. So you're
Yeah.
paying the 69, almost $7,000, and that's just the risk that you take.
Yeah. So the way we do it is this. We charge $3,500 for the Department of Labor stage. If there's no visas available, then we're not going to charge you for the rest of the amounts, because that includes over $2,000 worth of filing fees. And it's, if there's no visas available, we can't submit the petition. So your risk essentially is $3,500, which, it depends on your labor needs. It depends on your risk, and you'd have to evaluate that yourself as a company. But I will say that all of our employers got their workers last year. The question is when they're going to get them. So if you applied, for workers in February and didn't make it, then you could potentially have applied in April or May again. So you kind of you can keep applying for the next available cap. But like I said, with the Northern Triangle workers, if you bring workers from those countries, the processing time at the embassies takes longer, but at least you'll be secure. And that, because up until this point, the cap that they've placed on those Northern Triangle workers has not been met yet. So you have about 100% chance of getting workers if you bring workers from those countries. So that's why if you're a new employer, I would say invest if you can. The only problem is, well, you guys being in Louisiana, it's just the cost of bringing workers from Guatemala as opposed to a bus ride from Mexico is usually a little bit cheaper. But if you can front the expense of bringing them from Guatemala, a plane ticket, I would suggest bringing workers from Guatemala. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Louis, do you have any questions? Or is there anyone else on the call that has any questions about H2B or about Aztec labor? She does service several large landscape companies here in Louisiana, and they are very happy, thank goodness, with Miss Karen.
Thank you. I will say that one of the things that sets us apart is that we are very big on customer service. I know people get really antsy when they don't, things happen in the government where, what does this mean? Am I going to get my workers? Now what do I have to do? And sometimes we have to switch up the strategy midstream. And if you don't know what's going on, you can get really antsy, and this is your livelihood, right? So you want to be able to prepare. And so we are very transparent. We try to communicate with the clients as much as we can and hold their hand as much as we can, because even seasoned employers have questions. Things change all the time. I mean, it's politics, right? So
how we can get you information so that way how we can get you information and making how to make an appointment with you to talk about
sure
2024 process.
Yeah, definitely. I will share my information with Carrie Jane, and if that's okay.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
fine.
You can send that. Another thing I was going to say is that we also are bilingual. So we provide, you know, for your Spanish speaking community, Carrie Jane, we can assess their need in Spanish as well.
Very good.
Awesome.
Louis, I will make an email between Karen and Adriana and get that conversation started with you for you.
Where we go? Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Does anybody else have any questions for Karen right now on H2B? Karen is a member of LNLA, so she's available, and you'll see her more and more, especially with this filing process starting for 2024. So I appreciate you being here, and for all of you, we're not going to do introductions today since we're out of time, but does anybody have any questions that they need answered before we go? And you know, I'm always available for questions, and if I don't know the answers, I will find them out for you, but we won't have another Zoom meeting until September 1st. So nothing. All right. Well, cool. Thank you guys so much. Have a good weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.